Ladies and gentlemen, once again, please welcome tonight's Master of Ceremonies, Mr. Jerry Vandermeer.
Welcome once again, and let's get underway with the important reason we are here tonight. In today's world, perhaps too much emphasis has been given to sports icons and not enough to true heroes. While many great Kentuckians have filled the history books from Daniel Boone to President Lincoln, there are numerous Kentuckians that the museum found that they too deserve recognition for their significant contributions to aviation's advancements and inventions. We became the state's official Hall of Fame for aviation in 1994, and in 1995, we officially opened the museum's doors with a reunion of the legendary Doolittle Raiders. We have a wonderful exhibit in Hangar B. Please go and look at that before you leave tonight. With tonight's enshrinees, a total of 105 individuals have thus far been honored to date. We've introduced WASPs and warriors, executives and designers, instructors and astronauts, statesmen and inventors, many who have brought change to aviation, and some who have greatly influenced the world we live in. I encourage you all also to look at our Hall of Fame area right here to your right as you go into Hangar B. At this time, we wish to present the Kentucky Aviation Achievement Award. This recognition is given to a group or individual who has shown through their actions an outstanding commitment to the preservation or promotion of aviation or aerospace in Kentucky. This year, it will be presented to ASR Pioneer. In 2001, the Kentucky Aviation Hall of Fame inducted an American inventor from Lexington, Capital Solomon Lee Van Meter. He is famous for inventing the first successful backpack parachute. This year we'll be honoring a company that has taken that idea and applied it to saving the entire aircraft and its passengers. Besides this application, ASR Pioneer has products that NASA has used on Mars. Let us take a minute to learn more about the Nicholasville-based company.
ASR Pioneer, whose headquarters is located in Nicholasville, Kentucky, is looking toward the future of safety in aviation. Their goal is to save lives. As company president and CEO Larry Williams has said, we cannot prevent the failure, but we might be able to prevent the fatality. ASR Pioneer designs, tests, and produces whole airframe parachute recovery systems to bring down an entire aircraft and its occupants safely in an in-air emergency. A concept that was initially conceived in the early 1960s with the idea of safely landing the plane in the event of a catastrophic in-flight emergency. Once in trouble, the system would cause the wings to detach, then parachutes would be deployed from the failing wings, as well as the fuselage, and all would descend safely to the ground. A patent was issued after the concept was successfully tested in 1967, but unfortunately there was little commercial interest in the idea at the time. Aviation Safety Resources, ASR, was founded in 2000 as a private company to see if it could generate more interest in the whole plane recovery system concept. Additional patents were issued for the Tri-Chute Safe Landing System in 2011 and the Smart Recovery System in 2012. In 2018, Larry Williams, former president and CEO of BRS Aerospace, saw value in what ASR was trying to do and reconstituted the company as a C Corp. Larry understood the need for advanced safety products in the emerging urban air mobility, or UAM, advanced air mobility, AAM market could be met with the technology that ASR had developed. UAMs and AAMs are envisioned as a safe and efficient aviation transportation system using highly automated, manned and unmanned aircraft that will operate and transport passengers or cargo at lower altitudes within urban and suburban areas. This emerging market is projected to be $1.5 trillion with 3,000 vertical takeoff and landings, VTOL vehicles, in operation by 2025. Simply put, a new mode of transportation is coming and the public expects it to be safe. As the company grew, it saw that it would need to expand its engineering and production capabilities, and the quickest way of doing that was by acquiring companies that could support ASR's goals. The first, in 2021, was Strong Enterprises, the oldest general aviation parachute equipment manufacturer in the United States. And the next, in 2022, ASR would acquire Pioneer Aerospace, formerly known as Pioneer Parachute Company. With that acquisition, ASR would be able to rebrand itself as ASR Pioneer. Conventional aircraft recovery systems have been used since the 1980s and are credited with saving more than 500 lives. But a recovery system to work for these UAMs, you must inflate the parachute and get it into a stable descent quickly. Standard recovery systems won't work because of insufficient forward speed. The canopy needs to inflate faster. What is needed is a system that will recover the aircraft with no forward speed, as would be encountered with a vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. And that's a game changer. ASR has developed the Extreme Rapid Deployment System for these VTOL aircraft. This life-saving technology creates an extremely rapid parachute canopy inflation on extraction, which allows occupants to survive after landing. Unlike other existing recovery systems that may have a chute with a 65-foot canopy if you have forward speed, the only way to fill that canopy is with altitude loss. It would take 920 feet of altitude loss to inflate that canopy before the aircraft would slow down. ASR's system uses rockets and 3 separate chutes to begin decelerating an aircraft within 2.5 seconds, with an altitude loss of only 250 to 300 feet. While the ASR Pioneer headquarters building is located in Nicholasville, they also have a presence in 4 other locations. Sales and marketing and the final assembly of the parachute recovery systems occur in Nicholasville. A testing operation is located in Milton, Florida. An engineering and prototyping shop in Bloomfield, Connecticut. Strong Enterprises has its location in Orlando, Florida. Pioneer Parachutes is located in Columbia, Mississippi, where large-scale manufacturing occurs in a 106,000 square foot building. They have more than 165 employees and more than 4.5 million parachute deliveries. And they had a choice for the location of their headquarters, and they chose Kentucky. The workforce here is more qualified to handle the task to work successfully in the ASR work environment. The workers also tend to be more interested in coming to work for a company and making a career in it. That is not the case in many other states with aerospace businesses. ASR also sees that it would get broad support from state and local officials. It found that Kentucky is an excellent place to do business. It is therefore fitting that ASR Pioneer, in recognition of its efforts to promote aircraft safety, be recognized with the Kentucky Aviation Hall of Fame's 2022 Aviation Achievement Award.
Tonight, we are honored to have with us John Estes, ASR Pioneer Operations Manager, Kentucky, and Mike Rinaldi, ASR Pioneer Director of Operations, to tell us more about this innovative company. I just had a moment to speak with him and talk about a guy who loves what he does. Please welcome John Estes.
I'd like to thank the Aviation Museum from Kentucky and the Aviation Museum of Hall of Fame for having us here tonight. It's a very special honor, and it means a lot to me to be here. I was born in Frankfort, Kentucky. I've worked in aerospace for over 25 years, and to see the passion from all these folks who run this, it means a lot to me, and it's inspiring for all of us here who have contributed to aviation, and I wish there were more young people here to see it. We're kind of an older group here. But as I was watching the video, I remembered the first time that I was actually in a plane working for a different company, and I was picked up in a Cirrus aircraft, and it was just, even though I am an aviation engineer, I do know the risk of flying, and I am a little scared of flying each time that it happens. And that's why we work for a parachute company. But the pilot, I was in Georgetown. I was being picked up to fly to Alabama for a meeting. And normally I'm flying with my boss, who was kind of crazy and thought he was a pilot. And so he 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 always assured me that if anything went wrong, he could take over and fly the plane. But he wasn't on the plane yet. It was a pilot, and the pilot was 22 years old, and it looked like he was 12. And right before we took off, he turned around to me, and I didn't know anything about parachute recovery systems at the time. He turned around to me right before we took off, and he said, "Hey, if something happens to me, just reach up and pull this lever." And I go, "What?" And he goes, "Yeah, there's a parachute on this plane, and if I have a heart attack or pass out or something," he's like, "just pull this lever, and it'll fire a rocket, and it'll deploy a parachute, and it'll save our lives." And I go, "What?" And so ironically, years later, here I am working for a company that I'm very proud of, and that has accomplished a whole lot, and it has over 80 years in parachute experience, and we're working on that same sort of systems that baffled me that first time flying on a plane that had a system that would save our lives. And just the other day, you can look it up, there was just a few days ago, a Cirrus plane, somebody caught it on a Facebook video. The plane crashed down, and the parachute was deployed and saved the lives of the people who were in that plane. So I've spent most of my life working in aerospace. I worked on space shuttle for 5 years. I went to University of Kentucky. I have a mechanical engineering degree, and I love airplanes. My dad and family members got me excited about planes from a very early age, and I'm very passionate about that. And as a lot of people here are, you hear it from everybody you talk to in this room that, they'll tell stories, and those stories can get passed down to people, young people who will hopefully be inspired to go work on airplanes and to lead our country in aviation development. I'm going to speak just for a few minutes on flying cars. Flying cars are kind of the same to me, as what's in your pocket with your cell phone. I mean, in the early 90s, we all had laptops, or the emergence of laptops, and now you have a laptop in your pocket. And flying cars will probably be something that our kids or grandkids will experience in their life. And there's been people working on it since I was amazed in 1988 when I saw somebody working on flying cars, and it's been a long road, but it eventually will happen, and that's what our company is here to do, is to provide safety and parachutes for those type of vehicles, so that in the event of any sort of anomaly, there is a safety system. We're kind of like the airbag of the automobile, so airbags save lives, parachutes save lives. And, much like in 1849 when folks were going to California to mine for gold, there's only a couple people that actually got rich. And that's the people who made pickaxes and shovels and blue jeans. There's over 100 companies trying to develop flying cars and flying vehicles and eVTOL and any other acronym you want to put on it. But ultimately, they will need a parachute, whether or not the government mandates it, which we're hoping they will. As soon as one company decides that, hey, we want a parachute, all the others will follow along. And working at ASR Pioneer has given me an opportunity to not just continue working at an aerospace company here in Kentucky. I can't imagine working on anything else but planes and things that fly, and I'm very proud to present the award for aviation achievement to Aviation Safety Resources Pioneer. And Mike Rinaldi is an associate of mine. He's a leader of our company, and we're going to bring him up here right now. Mike, so this is the Aviation Achievement Award presented to ASR Pioneer located here in Nicholasville, Kentucky. We're proud to accept it. We work hard every day to provide parachutes for airplanes and all sorts of engineering situations. And thank you, Mike.
Thank you, John. Well, thank you, John, for that wonderful introduction. First off, let me say we are very honored as a company to be here and to be recognized by Kentucky and the aviation community as an innovator in a new market that's coming our way. And a lot of people don't realize how quickly this market is progressing, but in a few short years, we're going to see flying drones and taxis and all that stuff that we saw in the Jetsons when we were just kids, right? So it's coming quick. It was a little later than originally anticipated, but it's coming quick. And our passion as a company is to make it achievable in a safe way. And ASR Pioneer has we have a motto that we save lives, and I think John mentioned that as well. We're in the market of saving lives, and the way we're doing that nowadays is with aviation, with aircraft recovery. But our history of our companies that have come together has come a long way. So one of the companies that is part of the ASR Pioneer group is a company called Pioneer Aerospace, also known as Pioneer Parachutes. And this company was invented or started in 1938, co-founded by a gentleman named Floyd Smith. And Floyd Smith had he was part of a wing walker circus kind of entertainment industry, and his wife had a near miss in a parachute incident. She survived, and he said, well, what can I do to make it safer? And he invented what we call the modern way of parachuting. He invented the ripcord, and he decided that a ripcord was the best way to deploy a parachute. So in 1938, Floyd Smith invented this ripcord deployed parachute, which is now how every parachute in a skydiver in the skydiving world, or even in the aircraft world, is deployed. And in 1938, there was the war, World War II coming upon us, and there was a shortage of silk. And Pioneer Parachutes was the first company who decided that we can use nylon, a new material never used before, to make parachutes. And they proved that to the military at the time, that this was the best way to move forward with parachutes. And they became the largest producer of parachutes for World War II. And continuing to innovate, they are now have six of the parachutes used on Mars are sitting there. And one of the interesting parts about parachutes used on Mars is once they deploy, whether it's a rover or satellite or whatever, they deploy, they land on Mars, and they float down to the ground. And well, they sit there because there's nobody to gather them, so they sit there forever. So we are proud that 6 of those parachutes are Pioneer Aerospace parachutes. And so innovation is where these companies were built. ASR in the modern times, innovation of aircraft recovery. Pioneer in the innovation of using nylon instead of silk and developing ripcords. And there's another company called Strong Enterprises, and that was started in 1961 by a gentleman called Ted Strong. And he was a skydiver at heart, just like me. And he wanted to figure out a way that he could do something that would pay for his skydiving hobby. And he could sew. So he realized that, hey, I can make some of these parts, because back then they were only using surplus materials, military surplus materials for skydiving. But he could actually sew and make those materials. So he decided, I'll do that, and I'll make these parachute supplies for skydivers so that I can pay for my jumps. And that basically was the start of Strong Enterprises in 1961. So he took that, and one of the biggest innovations in the skydiving world that Ted Strong did was in 1983. He was one of the first commercial producers of the tandem parachute. And for those of you that aren't familiar with tandem, it's when two people can jump under one parachute. So most people that make skydives in modern times are passengers of a qualified, experienced tandem instructor, and they go on a jump with one parachute, two people. And Ted Strong was the one who did that in 1983 for the first time with a commercially available parachute. And it's completely modernized the skydiving community. So what I'm getting at is these companies are built by innovators. And I am just a representative of these innovators, but these companies were created by these innovators, people like the Wright brothers who innovated the airplanes. And we all kind of were humbled by the fact that we can stand behind great men and pioneers of the industries to continue and develop what their dreams and their passions were and create it into what it is today. So aircraft recovery might be the future, but if you look to the past, tandem parachuting, nylon instead of silk, these are all innovators that have developed parachuting and aviation as a whole into an industry that now is growing into something different and something new. And I'm sure there's something else far in the future that we don't know yet that will come to be at one point. So, excuse me. So, the three companies, Pioneer Aerospace, Strong Enterprises, and ASR, which is Aircraft Recovery Systems, is now looking to the future of what we could do next to again save lives. That's our goal. We want to make, whether it's aviation, whether it's skydiving, whether it's military troops, we want to make a product that can save lives and keep everybody that uses our products safe. And that's our goal, and that's what we're part of. And it's very humble to be part of an industry like this. And like John said, we're passionate about it. I started as a skydiver, and I just wanted to do something that I didn't consider work. And I've been doing it for 20 years, and I feel like I haven't worked a day in my life. So I'm still a skydiver at heart, but it is passionate. And my passion is to save lives, and my passion is to be part of this aviation community. And again, we are deeply honored that we are getting recognized by Kentucky as an innovator and a future representative of the aviation market and saving lives. So thank you so much, and we really appreciate the opportunity and the recognition of being here. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you to John and Mike for the work you and your company are doing for the safety of aviation. Congratulations once again to ASR Pioneer. Let us now honor those Kentuckians who have been elected for the enshrinement into the Kentucky Aviation Hall of Fame. By their work, their leadership, and perseverance, they have furthered the Commonwealth's contribution to aviation and aerospace. The Aviation Museum's membership were all deeply saddened that our first enshrinee passed away only a few short weeks ago. The day before he passed, he asked his family, a family member, to bring him here to the museum so he could see his planes. If you go into the next hangar and look up, you will see two wonderful sailplanes, the Sisu and the Nimbus, that Jack donated to the museum. That is one of the places where Jack felt at home, up high in that rarefied air. Let's take a few moments to review the life of Philip Jack Baugh, Jr.
English poet William Blake was once quoted as saying, "Great things are done when men and mountains meet." And Philip Jackson Baugh, Jr., Jack, has met many mountains. Jack's list of accomplishments would impress just about anyone. An accomplished businessman, former U.S. Air Force jet fighter pilot, world-class standard-bred horse breeder, North Carolina legislator, and chairman of the board of 2 universities and many nonprofit organizations. But no matter whatever else he was involved with, the closest thing to his heart was flying. Jack was born in 1932 to his parents Philip Jackson and Frances Jones Baugh in Charlotte, North Carolina. His love of flying started when he was just a young boy. He was among a group of friends who were avid model builders, and Jack led the group in building a full-size glider. The plan was to try to push it off of a hill with Jack as the pilot. Fortunately, a local neighbor who was also a pilot caught wind of the plan and stepped in as the test pilot. Jack was offered a ride in a real airplane and got his first flying lesson at Plaza Airport in Charlotte when he was 12. At 16, he was a licensed pilot. After high school, he first attended North Carolina State College to study engineering, thinking he would like to become a doctor. Jack then transferred to Duke University and entered the Air Force ROTC program. He graduated from Duke on the Dean's List in 1954 with an AB degree in psychology and was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force Reserve. He participated in the Air Force pilot training program at Graham Air Base in Marianna, Florida, where he finished first in his class and received an Award of Merit. Commissioned in the Air Force, he graduated first in his class at Graham Air Base and rose to the rank of captain. He served as a jet fighter pilot before his honorable discharge in 1962. Jack began his business career as an executive in the textile industry in North Carolina, eventually merging 3 textile companies to create P.J. Baugh Industries. But Jack continued his love of flying, and in particular, sailplanes. That brought him into contact with an aircraft designer named Leonard Nemi in 1963, a meeting that would change the world of competition soaring. Nemi had designed a sailplane that people at home could build, but after the prototype's first flight, he decided to sell it as something other than a kit or plan to home builders. Instead, Nemi modified the design for production as a finished, ready-to-fly sailplane. He changed the designation to Sitsu 1A. Nemi set up the Arlington Aircraft Company in Texas to manufacture the craft. Construction began on the first 4 sailplanes in 1960. Pilots quickly snapped up the finished aircraft, but production costs surpassed profits, and Nemi turned to Jack for help to turn things around. Jack and Nemi moved the factory to Greenville, South Carolina in 1963, and Jack underwrote the production costs of 6 more Sitsu aircraft. On July 31, 1964, Alvin H. Parker took off from his hometown, Odessa, Texas, at the controls of his aircraft, registration number N1100 Zulu, and flew for 1,042 kilometers, or 647 miles, a world record distance. The flight shattered a symbolic and psychological barrier that had defeated sailplane pilots worldwide for years. The aluminum and composite Sitsu 1A recaptured the world's free distance record and the world's distance to a predetermined goal record of 490 miles from Germany and Russia, respectively. Jack would purchase the record-breaking aircraft and donate it to the National Air and Space Museum of the Smithsonian, where it now hangs, cementing its place in American aviation history. While it was a record-breaking plane, profits never covered expenditures, and the last Sitsu would be built in 1965. Jack would also own one of these aircraft. He donated it to the Aviation Museum of Kentucky, where it is now on display. Jack's love for the world of horse breeding and racing took him and his family to Lexington, where he became a global leader in standardbred harness racing with the purchase of Almahurst Farm in Nicholasville, Kentucky in 1963. Almahurst would eventually be known as the largest harness horse racing farm in North America. It became the leading breeder of average money winners per start in the United States and breeder of 2 world champions in 1972. Jack served as the president of the United States Trotting Association, earning multiple awards for his contributions to the industry, including Horseman of the Year. While at Duke in 1953, Jack met and married his first wife, Patricia Jean Myers, with whom he was blessed to have had a son and 3 daughters. Heartbreakingly, Patricia died in 1984, and in 1986, Jack married his second wife, Laura Jane Kelly, adding 4 sons to the family. Jack was an inspiring, engaging father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. While Jack had a love for flying, he did have a greater love for his family. It is therefore fitting that Philip Jackson Jack Baugh Jr., whose leadership with the production of the Sitsu 1A, which would become one of the most successful American competition sailplanes ever flown, be enshrined in the official Aviation Hall of Fame of the Commonwealth of Kentucky.
I am truly honored this evening to serve as a presenter for Jack Baugh's Award and his fitting enshrinement into the Aviation Museum of Kentucky's Hall of Fame. I feel fortunate to have known Jack through his many years of involvement with the Aviation Museum, but like other people, I just feel extremely lucky to be able to say he was my friend. Admittedly, Jack could make any one of us envious of a lifestyle involving interests from airplanes to horses. One could say he led a charmed life, but it took hard work, and Jack was successful because he truly threw his heart and soul into all the things he pursued in life. When I think of Jack, I'm reminded of that saying, it's not the size of the man in the fight, but the size of the fight in the man. Through the video, we gain at least a glimpse into his past experiences and many accomplishments, but not all. Because you see, Jack often could not disclose to friends or family the secret errands he was often sent on during his time in the military, flying the latest aircraft on many secretive missions. He was a veteran who served his country with great honor and pride. And as you also saw in the video, Jack held many prestigious and important positions in his life, but he never had any airs about him. He was always the consummate gentleman. And in recently reading a wonderful biography about President George Washington, the title of that book I think also embodies who Jack was, the gentleman warrior. He earned the respect, love, and admiration of others by who he was, and the sincere interest he always showed in who we were, what our thoughts were and interests. Well, you truly can call the hangar that we are in this evening the house that Jack built, as this building originally was the home of the airport's fixed base operator, or FBO, for many years at the time, and was known as Sprite Flight, which Jack played an integral part in developing. We have Jack to thank for initially finding the museum a home, after negotiating with then Diamond Shamrock and the airport to have a facility for the Aviation Museum. That hangar, which was much smaller than this one, but served our purposes at the time and was just across the field here at Bluegrass Airport. He, along with our museum founders, George Gumbert and Wendell Murphy, finally realized the dream from just talking about it to seeing it become a reality, and finally having a place for the many great artifacts and planes that we were amassing, and that their spouses begged them to move from their increasingly crowded homes, backyards, and garages. At a time when he could have retired, he also served for a while as the museum's executive director, where he made many contributions and to set the museum on a course to be successful. As you heard in the video, Jack donated the sailplane Sisu to our museum, and like its twin in Smithsonian's Air and Space Museum, these aircraft will always hold a prominent place in our respective museums and our minds. It will always serve as a reminder of his place among other aviation pioneers, those who were willing to push the boundaries and dared spectacularly to soar to new heights. At this time, I wish to introduce to you one of Jack's daughters, Patricia Baugh, who is here to receive the award on behalf of the family. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Patricia to the podium.
And my support system. I don't know that I'm going to be able to get through this.
I'm her other half. I'm Brent Caldwell, and we're
12 and a half years.
12 and a half years and engaged. But I assured her that I would be here to stand beside her and help her through this. And it's been my pleasure to know Mr. Ball for the last 12 and a half years. So she asked me if I'd stand with her, and I'm more than happy to do that and fill in if she has some problems with it. Go ahead, sweetie.
Thanks. I know my dad would be thrilled to have this honor. He did know that this was going to occur. For many years, he would not accept being inducted into the Hall of Fame. He unexpectedly passed away September 10th. We did have his visitation here, which I know he was excited about, I'm sure. But on September 9th, my brother brought him out here. So he got to go through the museum again. Got to see so many people that he loved through the years, and that was such a highlight for him. He just could not quit talking about it. So I've also been asked to say something that y'all may not know. People probably didn't know about him. But he was always a little engineer, always wanted to find a better way to do something. And he was born in 1932 during the Depression, so there was always a want to have different things and do things and help other people. And my grandfather and grandmother were really adamant to help others as well. So my father had a shop in the back of the garage and would make sleds and sell them, would make toys and give them away, would do a lot of different things like that. So one time my grandmother was trying to get him to come back inside. School was the next day, and he wouldn't come. So she sent the dad out. Jack, you got to come. You got school tomorrow. He said, Dad, I'm almost done with this. So my father also worked for Quaker State Oil. Back then, it really didn't matter that you weren't 16 years old. And his job was to grease the gears. So those of you all that are older would remember the little dome-shaped greasers with the little spout and the flexible bottoms. Well, it was his job to then go grease manually every gear at Quaker State Oil. And he just knew there had to be a better way. So what he was working on was something pretty amazing. He was, I believe, 12, 13 years old at the time. So his dad patiently waited. Dad showed him what it was. My father showed him what it was. And he was like, Jack, have you shown anyone what this is? Have you told anyone about this? He said, no, I haven't, Dad. Jack, are you sure no one knows and no one has seen this? He said, no, I've just been out here doing it. So with that, my grandfather called our attorney, who had been a long-time attorney, about 10 o'clock at night, Irvin Boyle. He was so sweet. And he said, Irv, you got to come over here now. He said, Jack, I can't. I'm finishing a brief. Can I please come in the morning? He said, sure, that's fine. So apparently that's a garage that they never locked. And my father thought it was kind of odd because my grandfather came back and locked the garage up. So the next morning, sure enough, Irvin Boyle came, looked at it, and was astounded. So with that, he turned to my grandfather and said, we have to get a patent on this, which they did. My father got the patent. Lo and behold, he then went to Quaker State. As y'all know, those who know my father, he wouldn't say a word about much that he didn't want known. So sure enough, Quaker State, I believe it was when he was 14, bought my father's patent for the automatic greaser and installed it in Quaker State. And that was the base that allowed him to then get into building hot rods and to buy his first plane, where he got his license at 16, so he could fly and start doing a lot of other good things for individuals as well. So that was just kind of a fun story that not very many people know about. Another thing regarding flying, he got me hooked on it, but the deal was for me to take power lessons, I had to learn how to fly a glider first so I could get the plane down if the engine went. So he was trying to break another record and did. So I was able to get out of school for 2 weeks, and we flew to Colorado Springs, and I did get my glider's license. And I was having too much fun up there. I didn't want to come back down. And then all of a sudden I hear they're telling me, please, you need to come back. You've done what you need to do. Come back and land. Well, I was having fun. What are they going to do? Get me down? So, unfortunately, not really realizing it, I went across into the Black Forest in Colorado Springs. All of a sudden, I hear Dad's voice in my ear. Gal, come down. You're getting too far in. You're going to lose altitude, and you're going to crash. So with that, I did an immediate turn and landed. So anyway, so he was always very conscious about safety and flying and getting down. So.
So
And-
his other career,
Oh.
it's already been mentioned.
So this was sort of mentioned a little bit. And my father technically did leave the Air Force in 1956. However, he went to another branch at that time, which is now talked about, it's now printed, but my father still would never speak about it. He actually went to go work for the CIA in their U-2 program. And we were a little curious when we saw his discharge papers down in a drawer that said he left in 1962. Well, we thought he left in 1956. Well, he didn't. And the other thing that piqued our interest was because my uncle's ex-wife spilled the beans because she was an air traffic controller in Alaska, and my father had to fly in after being shot at over Russia, and flew in, and my uncle was working in the hangar that they had opened up for him to fly into, and had said, if you ever tell Patty, you will never see your family again, because my mother had no idea what my father was doing. She just thought he was out. We also had a cotton waste business, and she just thought that he was out selling cotton around the world. But anyway, so that's it. So thank you very much. Really do appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, the plaque inscribed in the name of Philip Jack Baugh Jr. is being presented to his daughter Patricia, and he's declared duly enshrined in the Kentucky Aviation Hall of Fame.
Wonderful, and congratulations again to Jack Baugh. We have one of, our next enshrinee is Mike Collins. Throughout the history of storytelling visuals, such as photographs, they have played a significant role. Visual storytelling is integral to the human experience, dating all the way back to cave dwellings. From a very young age, Mike learned the art of storytelling with a lens, and our next enshrinee believed in telling his stories with a camera. Let's take a few moments to review the life of Mike Collins.
The pen is mightier than the sword, and one picture is worth 1,000 words. As you will see, both of these influential expressions can speak to the epic life of journalist and photographer Michael Patrick Collins. Mike was born to parents Rita and Bill Collins in Cleveland, Ohio on December 21, 1961. Many of Mike's most treasured friendships throughout his life resulted from his love of trains. While in Cleveland, Mike's dad took Mike and his siblings to the train yard near their home. It was from that experience that Mike developed his love of trains. At Southern Junior High School, Mike took an interest in both the clarinet and photography, but it soon came a time when he would have to make a choice. Either purchase a clarinet or a camera. He decided to set his course as a professional photographer. Mike taught himself black and white darkroom skills in junior high school. He worked on the staff of the school newspapers in both junior high and Tates Creek High School as a photographer and photo editor. After graduating in 1980, Mike entered Western Kentucky University as a photojournalism major and was the leading photographer for the yearbook and newspaper. He had internships in Jackson, Michigan and Jacksonville, Florida. He also worked as a freelance photographer for local newspapers during this time. Following graduation in 1984 with a degree in photojournalism, Mike found employment as a photographer and editor for newspapers in Clarksville, Tennessee, and later in Goldsboro, North Carolina. Mike kept pushing the journalism and photography envelope as he arrived in aviation journalism in 1987, becoming co-founder and first editor of the Southern Aviator, a regional tabloid. 6 years later, in 1994, the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association hired him to be part of its internationally renowned AOPA Pilot magazine team, where he quickly became its managing editor. The magazine is the most widely circulated aviation publication in the nation. Mike began flight training and soloed in North Carolina, then finished his private pilot certificate in Frederick, Maryland, after starting at AOPA. For a story for AOPA Pilot, he completed a 2-week intensive training course and earned his instrument rating. Mike wrote thousands of articles covering a broad range of aviation-related subjects, from general aviation aircraft and equipment to pilot training and evaluating FAA regulatory policies and procedures. His commitment to exhaustive research supported his standard for editorial integrity and excellence. His leadership in educating pilots about the FAA ADS-B mandate and how to comply with it led him to be recognized as an ADS-B industry expert. Mike's voice was so respected on this issue that manufacturers sought his input, and the FAA uses his writing. His articles, published over 30 years, have and will continue to serve pilots and their continuing need for recurrent training and education. Subsequent promotions at AOPA were executive editor, vice president of diversified products, vice president of publications, technical editor, and director of business operations. He traveled extensively around the United States for work and hobbies, including craft beer conferences and riding, driving, and photographing trains. Mike was a member of several professional and philanthropic boards. He earned numerous recognitions and many awards over his lifetime. To quote Mike, photojournalism is all about storytelling, and aviation is full of great stories just waiting to be told. In February 2021, Mike was stricken with the COVID-19 virus. Sadly, he passed away after 2 weeks in an intensive care unit on a ventilator. He was 59. Western Kentucky University posthumously honored Mike in October 2021 with its College Heights Herald Award for outstanding contributions to journalism. When asked what he remembered about Mike, Todd Uvard, who had worked with him at the Southern Aviator, said, "Mike and I flew hundreds or maybe thousands of hours together in our Skylane. We learned how to fly formation and shoot aerial photos as a team. We had a modified 182 that we had removed the door, and Mike hung out the door to capture amazing images of airplanes and iconic landscapes for our covers. He wrote the copy, edited the writers, and built relationships with hundreds of customers, advertisers, subscribers, and everything else. He did it all under the influence of endless cups of black coffee and copious amounts of imported beer. We flew all over the place. We never missed a deadline. We laughed, we cried, we fought together like battling brothers, but together we forged a great product in a hard business." Mike is survived by his wife, Jeanette Prince, whom he met at AOPA in 1995, and children, daughters Jen and Bridget, and son Matthew. It is therefore fitting that Michael Patrick Collins, having accomplished life as a journalist, photographer, loving father, and husband, be enshrined in the official Aviation Hall of Fame of the Commonwealth of Kentucky.
Presenting Michael Collins tonight will be Mr. Bob Minter. Bob, I never told you this, but I looked up to you as a big brother when he was the executive director of the Aviation Museum of Tennessee, and I was the executive director of this museum. He always provided me with a great deal of wonderful information on what to do in a challenging position. Bob is semi-retired senior aviation executive consultant. Just a few of his titles over his 60-year career have included Southern Region Manager for AOPA, Director of Airports Development and Operations for the state of Tennessee, President and Executive Director of the Tennessee Museum of Aviation, and Founder and Chairman Emeritus of the Tennessee Aviation Hall of Fame. Please welcome Bob Minter. We will be turning the house lights up because Bob will be doing this introduction from his table. Please welcome Bob Minter.
The good news is you don't have to look at me. And if there's a way to bring the picture up of Mike smiling, please do that. If there isn't, remember it. That was Mike Collins. Positive, from the start to the finish. I don't think Dr. Norman Vincent Peale knew more about being positive than Mike Collins. I want to tell you how I met him. This tells you everything about this guy. He and Todd Huvard had gotten together and were struggling through how to launch the Southern Aviator. How many of you in here remember that paper? Probably a bunch of pilots. Thank you very much, everybody at his table at least. When I first met Mike, he was a single parent. Now, he was 20 years my junior. A lot of people are now. I'm the oldest guy in town. He had this gorgeous little daughter, and she's sitting right there right now, and she's still beautiful, more so than ever. He was doting on her. Let me tell you, in the early 90s, I had never met a single parent, male single parent. Now, I had been a single parent to a 17-year-old daughter a few years before. I ain't going there. I mean, redefined drama in my life. She was a young, very young little girl, and thankfully she was, because he might not have been able to do the job. I wasn't able to do my job right, but he certainly did. Mike showed affection for her in front of everybody. And that was still, remember now, there's a lot of gray hair in this room. Men didn't do a lot of that. But that got my attention. And I thought, what a hell of a man this is. He took care of that little girl very, very well. And then went to AOPA, and he and Jeanette got married and added Matthew and Bridget to the family. And I got to tell you, it's a family unit that anyone would envy. Gone too soon, and we miss him, but Mike was defined by his positiveness. I told Jen just a few minutes ago, I said, you know, I got to tell you something about your dad. He was a really bright guy, a very bright man. If Todd Huvard had not met up with and began working together with Mike, I don't know what he'd have done. Not that Todd's stupid, but Mike had the brains. And I'll tell you what Todd had, but I can't in public. But he had the nerve, let's put it that way. There's so many stories about his career. If you get a chance to read some of his writing, please do it. You heard them talk about his editorial integrity. Is that an unusual concept in this world today? You bet it is. That man researched unbelievably deep stuff. He never put anything on paper that wasn't absolutely right. But he was dealing with pilots. His training materials and the stuff he wrote about on pilot techniques and equipment and flight training and all that stuff is timeless. His legacy will be that. It was incredible. How many of you in here have read the story of Mike? And there was a fellow by the name of Mike Laver in South Carolina. I don't know if you knew that, but Mike had an MU-2. Mike Laver did. There's two Mikes. You got to go with me on this thing. I'll be talking about one on the other same time. Mike Laver had a dream of flying that MU-2 of his around the world. And he made a plan to go around, to take a trip around the world and end up at the manufacturing facility in Japan on its 50th anniversary. Somebody, I forget who, recommended that he get a hold of Mike Collins because he was looking for somebody to go with him. And he did. And he interviewed him, and instantly he knew he had the right guy. Mike went on a 26,000-mile trip around the world in that tiny little cockpit in that MU-2 with Mike Laver. And Mike put him in charge of the fuel stops. I think there were roughly 30 or more of them. That's an airplane with 6 fuel tanks that the refueling procedure is at best complex. You can't just fill up on one side, it'll go and fall over. So you gotta be really good and careful about it. But so when I was talking to Mike Laver I said, tell me something about your experience with Mike that has stuck with you. He said, Bob, you should have seen that man when we stopped to refuel. No language. He didn't. Mike wasn't both. He might have been bilingual, but I barely speak English, and I think he barely did too. But he didn't. There's a huge problem with the language differential. He said those crews, and you know, ground crews are pretty finicky, even no matter where you are in the world. Every time they stopped, he said those guys wanted their picture with him. They said they fell in love with him. He said he was waving his hands around, but he learned instantly to communicate with people that he couldn't understand and that basically couldn't understand him. He said, I'll never forget that. And I said, what else? He said, Bob, there wasn't one single, I'm talking 25 days, 98.1 hours of flying time, 26,500 odd miles. He said there wasn't an uncomfortable moment with that man. Not one. That's Mike Collins. That's who he is. So there was one other. Then I talked to Tom Haynes, who was his boss at AOPA. And Tom's not here. Thank goodness I can tell you this. This is me. I don't know if this is true, but I believe it is. After Mike passed, I think Tom Haynes was scratching his head going, I can't do it without this guy, because admittedly he was running successfully the communications division, the publications at AOPA with his boss. Tom retired. He was no fool. He retired. But the legacy that Mike has left in the journalism business and the photojournalism business is something else. One other thing. Do you remember that? I'm sure you do, being Kentuckians. Do you remember the Galaxy Girl, the airplane that we pulled out of the ice cap? Y'all remember that? Glacier Girl. Excuse me. Yeah, here I am. You know, I'm too old to remember something. They got that airplane out of the ice cap, 200 something feet down. Todd called me and said they've asked me to go up there and go down in the hole that they melted 200 some feet down in this ice cap and take the pictures. And I said, so you're going, aren't you? He says, I'm scared to death. I said, well, send Mike. He said, I can't do that. He's my main man. He said the magazine won't last 10 minutes if he goes on that trip. So I said, tell you what, I'll go. He said, you will? I said, yeah, I ain't no photographer, but I'll learn how real quick. I went to Atlanta when they were leaving in a DC-3 to fly up there and do that in case Todd didn't go. I was going to go. Darn it, he went. And got all those pictures that they published in the magazine back in those days. I mean, they had some adventures that were incredible together. I don't know how many miles they flew, but the little unknown thing, she had an unknown, I got one too. Nobody knew that when Mike joined up with Todd Uvard, he had never been in a little airplane in his life. He didn't know how to fly one either, but he became an accomplished pilot, photojournalist, and the whole bit. And I got to tell you something, hell of a man, with a family that you would envy right this minute. They're wonderful people. They're all sitting right here, and they're as proud as could be, and they should be. I loved him. I miss him. And I appreciate this opportunity to present him to you tonight. Thank you. Who's going to talk about that? Oh, here it is.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jeanette Collins is now receiving the plaque inscribed in the name of her late husband, Michael Collins, who is now declared duly enshrined in the Kentucky Aviation Hall of Fame.
I asked her to sit on my lap, and she won't do it.
And when you're gone, who remembers your name? Who keeps your flame? Who tells your story? On behalf of myself and our children, Jen, Matthew, and Bridget, thank you for telling Mike's story so that the people of Kentucky and beyond will remember his name. This honor is deeply meaningful for us and for Mike's sister, his brothers, and his friends. Thank you to our dear friend, Bob Minter, who I have known almost as long as Mike did. Thank you, Bob, for the nomination that you crafted with love and admiration. And thank you to the Kentucky Aviation Hall of Fame for recognizing Mike's contributions to aviation as worthy of induction, and for including him in the family of remarkable honorees. It is so fitting that we are here in Lexington, because as you've seen, Mike's story began as he was growing up here. His gifts in photography and for storytelling were nurtured here, and his education and experience at Tates Creek High School and Western Kentucky University prepared him well for when his career turned to aviation. And while he settled in Maryland, he was always excited to come to Kentucky. Kentucky was home, mom and dad, family, memories, and friends. Oh, and trips to Liquor Barn for bourbon. And when he had the opportunity to return here for his role at AOPA, as he did with a trip to Bowling Green for a 2016 story he wrote and photographed called Flying Miss Jenny, you can find it on the AOPA website, or to talk with students at the Western Kentucky School of Media, well, that was the best of all worlds for him. From his start here, he made his way to most of the states and multiple countries, and he became recognized by pilots around the world for his photography and reporting. He was passionate about getting the right shot and about writing in a way that explained technical topics clearly or brought someone's story to life on the page. And yet the true measurement of Mike's impact isn't the thousands upon thousands of photos he took or the millions of words he wrote and edited. The true measurement, as I am confident everyone who remembers him will agree, is the way he loved interacting with people, hearing their stories, sharing his wonderful sense of humor and infectious laughter, and bringing joy and kindness to every encounter. At the heart of it all was his huge heart. By action and example, he reminded us all what was truly important: family, friends, doing our best, helping others, and being honorable and compassionate. Since Mike died, our family's story has changed in ways that are hard to bear. We miss him so much, and we love him endlessly. We hold tightly to the memories we made with him. And so I urge you, make memories with your loved ones. Take the photo. Treasure every moment. Make the time. I began with a lyric from the musical Hamilton, which Mike never saw because he couldn't see the reason to, but I've seen about 42 times. I'd like to close with another. I ask myself, what would you do if you had more time? I think about this a lot. Although we can only wonder what other fabulous photos Mike would have taken and content he would have written, and how he would have uplifted many more people, we know that he would have done it with enthusiasm and with dedication to doing the best he could, all the while honoring the humanity of people and absolutely enjoying the ride in his journey of life. Mike's was a life worth emulating, and we are honored to share his memory and his story with you. Take good care of yourselves and each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeanette, and congratulations again to Mike. American sci-fi writer Isaac Asimov was quoted as saying The most exciting phrase to hear in science, the one that heralds new discoveries, is not eureka, but that's funny. And for doing research, the true delight is in the finding out rather than in the knowing. Our next enshrinee is very familiar with both of these sentiments. Let's look at the life and work of Joyce McClendon Evans.
Joyce McClendon Evans was born 4 days after Christmas, 1937, in Mayfield, Kentucky. She was the first of Will Ed and Pearl Carr McClendon's 2 daughters. Will Ed and Pearl shared a house with Will Ed's mother, Sally McClendon, that also housed Sally's flower shop. Everything in Mayfield was within easy walking distance for Joyce and her sister Sarah: downtown, schools, churches, and her dad's shoe store. She and her sister dominated 2 square blocks of downtown Mayfield. Many of her extended family members lived nearby, and her cousins influenced her play and behavior. There was a boy in her sophomore chemistry class at Mayfield High who continually pestered her to go out with him. And you might guess how that turned out. Joyce and Joel Evans were married in 1956 and had 3 children by 1960. Joyce and Joel spent the next 8 riotous years in Virginia. Joel was employed with the Navy Space Surveillance Program and later the University of Virginia, while they both continued to further their education. In 1967, they moved to Murray, where Joel finished his master's in physics. The Evans family moved to Lexington so that Joel could work on his PhD and Joyce on a degree in physiology and biophysics. After 2 years of graduate school, Joyce realized she was in over her head with family, home, school, and political activities. Something had to go, so for the time being, continuing education got scuttled. In 1968, Joel started his own business at Unfinished Universe, and Joyce shifted from being a teaching assistant in physics to conducting research at Wintergren Laboratory, which was part of the nascent biomedical engineering department at the University of Kentucky. Charlie Knapp was her supervisor and mentor. The excitement of cutting-edge experiments and their results pulled her deeper into a lifelong commitment. She continued her work in the role of research manager, conducting pioneering research into vibration and gravitational effects on the human body. Her early work was funded by the U.S. Air Force Office of Scientific Research. Earlier research from 1970 to 1985 at UK's Wintergren Lab focused on vibration and other extreme environments. Among other findings, this UK group determined that vibration in the Vietnam medevac helicopters was beneficial in returning blood from the limbs to the hearts of wounded soldiers. In the 1980s and 90s, research at Wintergren changed direction to include researching cardiovascular changes occurring during and after exposure to zero-G. Wintergren's centrifuge was not rated for humans, so initial research was limited to dogs and monkeys, and later included humans as larger centrifuges became available around the globe. Joyce traveled to NASA's Ames and JSC facilities and eventually Luftwaffe Raumfahrt in Germany to conduct testing on human-rated centrifuges. As with other groups, they were finding that big drops in blood pressure often occurred when exposed to increased gravitation. The G-induced loss of consciousness, or G-LOC, was becoming an expected event. NASA and the aerospace industry used the term orthostatic intolerance for lightheadedness induced by exposure to plus G environments. The Air Force was interested in research into G-LOC as it related to high-performance aircraft and also the return to Earth's gravity from weightlessness conditions experienced in space. Most early studies of G-LOC involved males, and Joyce has advocated that more studies are needed to include both genders, since women and men's physiological differences produce differing results. In particular, there is not evidence that the current favored countermeasure to weightlessness-induced deconditioning, a centrifuge in space, will be nearly as effective in women as it will be in men. Joyce retired from UK in 2019, but continues to do research and preparing aviators and astronauts to countermeasures to reduce G-LOC and reduce the cardiovascular deconditioning of weightlessness. Joyce's supervisor and mentor at UK was Charles Knapp. Dr. Knapp, who has made many contributions to the aerospace industry, says,
Joyce has conducted many years of research at the University of Kentucky and NASA. She has ascended the scientific ranks to become an internationally recognized expert in cardiovascular responses to artificial gravity. Her groundbreaking work in uncovering significant differences between women and men in their responses to artificial gravity will be critically important to developing countermeasures for future space missions. In addition to her research, Joyce has enhanced and brightened the careers of many in our biomedical engineering program. When students need mentoring, she is there. When the department needs advice, she offers it with respect. And when the program needs her help, she gives it unconditionally and with a smile. As depicted in the movie about the early days of NASA, Joyce Evans is truly the hidden figure of the biomedical engineering program at the University of Kentucky. I congratulate Joyce in being honored, and she has my deepest respect.
It is therefore fitting that Joyce McClendon Evans, in recognition of her contributions to the aviation and aerospace industry, be enshrined in the official Aviation Hall of Fame of the Commonwealth of Kentucky.
Presenting Joyce Evans tonight will be Dr. Michael Stenger. Joyce has told us that Dr. Michael Stenger, a Kentucky-educated rising star in NASA's Human Research Program, as the elements scientist for the Research Operations and Integration, ROI, element. Before joining ROI, he was the director of the NASA Johnson Space Center, the cardiovascular and vision laboratory of that, where he led diverse team investigating. This included cardiovascular adaptations to spaceflight. Mike received a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering and chemistry and a PhD in biomedical engineering from the University of Kentucky. Joyce went on to say that Michael has been our Johnson Space Center collaborator and a wonderful friend to UK. Please welcome Dr. Michael Stenger.
Good evening, everyone. I can't see anything. I can remember the very first time I met Joyce Evans. It was in the summer of 1998. I found her at her desk in room 1 of Wondergrain Research Lab, pile of papers and data on her desk, taller than she was. She was engaged in one of her, what I learned to be her daily rituals. She was drinking a Fresca, doing the daily crossword puzzle, and she was cussing at her computer. It's a true story. I thought I was there for a job interview, and I was surprised that the only question that I had to answer was, do you know how to use one of these computers? Her keyboarding skills were so poor that we tried to install voice recognition, voice-to-text software on her computer. And I don't know how frustrated you all get at your Siri or your Alexa, but imagine what that was like 25 years ago. I was fortunate enough to share an office with Joyce for the next 7 or 8 years, where I tried to teach her how to do email and use Microsoft Office, and she taught me how to be a scientist. It's a fair trade, I think. It's a lot of effort on my part. When I think back to those years, I really don't think about the world-class contributions to the field that Joyce has made, or the inclusivity and the equity reforms that she's influenced, like dual anonymous peer review, or the federal requirement to include women test subjects for any federal grant funding, for NASA or NIH grant funding. I think about pretty much anything but science. Those years of my life were transformative for me. I got proposed to my wife, I got married, I had babies, I bought my first house, and I shared an office with my friend and mentor the whole time. And I was fortunate to have someone like her to lean on whenever there are issues that arose. Things weren't always great. We argued about lots of things. Politics, quite frequently, local government stuff, like how many times I had to rewrite an abstract that I thought was perfectly fine the way it was. Most often we argued about where we're going to lunch for that day, who had the best cheeseburger or where the best Thai food was. So Joyce is a bit of a foodie, and it doesn't take much. She doesn't need an excuse to host a party at her house. She would always invite the graduate students over, and we always got to enjoy her culinary skills. It's been about 20 years, Joyce, since I've had that fruit top cheesecake, which I really, really miss. It was at one of these parties where I met her husband, Joel Evans, And he educated all of us grad students as well on bourbon whiskey and why Elijah Craig was the best bourbon for the buck. Joyce also organized department picnics, which are much bigger affairs on an annual basis. And I never really enjoyed going to these. I felt like they were a lot of work. But she convinced me they were the right thing to do. And I think that was Joyce's superpower in our relationship. She always got me to do what was good for me, even when I really didn't want to do it. She made me travel all over the world, participating in domestic and international research conferences, where I learned how to communicate science and develop professional networks. I know it sounds kind of weird to complain about seeing the world, but ironically in this audience, I really don't like flying. For things like that, she was pretty blunt in her leadership. It was suck it up, Buttercup. It's important. Usually she was much more subtle when she was pulling on my strings and getting me to do things. Like attending, there's a seminar series at the Gilhard Institute that was always so advanced and over my head. I had a hard time reading the papers, but she would drop a line like, "Hey, they have a pretty good bagel and donut spread there." That usually did the trick. Joyce also encouraged all of us graduate students to do community events, to give back to the community. We supported the engineering department's annual E-Day, the engineering day, where we showed biomedical instrumentation to the younger generation. And we learned how to talk about complex ideas to that next generation. And speaking of the next generation, there was a never-ending stream of college and high school and middle school kids coming through her office. And she spent all the time to educate them and mentor them, no matter who they were or how inexperienced they were. And so I'm incredibly honored to be the one on this stage sharing my experiences with her. But the reality is I'm just one among hundreds of students that she's influenced in her career. When I moved down to Houston and started my job at NASA, it was no surprise that there were already half a dozen other scientists and engineers down there that came out of her laboratory. And my first week there, one of them found me and asked me, "How is Mama Joyce doing?" And I had known her at this time for 8 or 9 years, and that was the first time I heard that expression. But upon reflection, it strikes me at how appropriate that really is. So on behalf of everyone who's had the opportunity to fall under her care and guidance, please join me in welcoming her to the Kentucky Aviation Hall of Fame.
Ladies and gentlemen, Joyce McClendon Evans is now receiving the plaque inscribed in her name and is declared duly enshrined in the Kentucky Aviation Hall of Fame.
It would be great. He knows I might just fall over. I'm not going to spend much time. We've had a wonderful night. But, sorry? How far away? About like that? Okay. I just wanted to say, just some of this is still so fluid. I was going to tell you a little bitty story about the part that I'm so excited about right now. As far as I know, it's still true, and I'll make it very short. There's a thing that's always been known since people have been going into space, that your cardiovascular system doesn't tolerate, it tolerates being in space, it just doesn't tolerate coming back to gravity. And people have worked and worked to overcome this problem of cardiovascular deconditioning. And really nothing has worked too well, and the current, and I mean current, it's been for the last 20 years, people have said, oh, if you ride a centrifuge, you can supply the gravity that you've lost when you go into space. So there's been for a long time a plan to put a centrifuge into space. It's never gone to any kind of real testing because it's so expensive, but people are still pursuing it. And I'm upset. I was one of those who was really pursuing it. And then I'm now upset about it because I'm learning, the more I look into it, the further I go, the more I find out that while it's really successful in helping men tolerate gravity, we have no evidence to show that it's successful in women. It doesn't look like it's nearly as good. And yet the plans to put a centrifuge in space or to use some form of gravity to help people recondition before they return to Earth is going full speed ahead without the testing that should be done on women. So that's what I'm involved in right now. I want to thank all of you who are here tonight, and I particularly want to mention that Charles Fisher is here from North Carolina, and he was a student in 1977. There's Mike from the 90s into the early thousands, and there's Connor Ferguson, who's here, who is still in the program. So we like to keep students involved in what's going on. Thank you for being here. Thank you to the Academy. I don't deserve this honor, but I sure do love it. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, and congratulations once again, Joyce. We hope that you enjoyed this evening. Our special thanks to you, ladies and gentlemen, for gathering here this evening to honor Kentucky's best and brightest in aviation. Final thanks to the class of 22, Jack Baugh, Michael Collins, Joyce Evans, and our Achievement Award, ASR Pioneer Worldwide. I'm going to go off script here a little bit. And speaking of volunteers, there is an individual I wish to especially recognize for his masterful orchestration of tonight's program and pulling everything together as he has done so each and every year for decades. For the Hall of Fame and working tirelessly behind the curtains, literally, all the AV, he is the president of AMK, Mr. Jim McCormick. But like any good leader, he is always quick to recognize the people that have helped him with this. Mr. Kirk Jefferson back there on the camera, Peter Barrows, our wonderful voice, and Larry Mitchell that helps a lot with the audiovisual. There are also additional museum members here tonight, board and members and volunteers that, in addition to the people you heard earlier, play a critical part to our museum. Person who organized our wonderful auction, Margie Riggs, and is also on the board of trustees, Linda McCormick, Jim's wife, and also our stage operator here tonight, Gary Lowe, Dr. Brent Haskell for his wonderful work with our simulators, Jerry Landreth, who just wears many, many hats, Don and Pat Shable, I know I saw you here this evening, Sherry Lemaster, one of our board of trustees, Ed Murphy, who heads up our wonderful aviation camp, Mike Malone, who keeps these aircraft looking so good as they are. All who are here with us this evening, thank you for your great work. But thank you so much. Good night.